In recent years, Europe has seen a political transformation that few could have predicted. Right-wing populism is on the rise, reshaping entire nations, challenging the European Union, and sparking fierce debates across the continent. Leaders like Viktor Orbán in Hungary, Marine Le Pen in France, and Giorgia Meloni in Italy are capturing the voices of those who feel left behind, frustrated with traditional politics, immigration, and globalization. But what's fueling this shift? Why are more people turning to leaders who promise to take back control and put their countries first? In this documentary, we dive into the origins, strategies, and impact of Europe's right-wing populist wave. To understand the right-wing populism sweeping across Europe, we must first break down what this political ideology entails. Populism, at its core, is a style of politics that pits the common people against the elite. It frames society as divided into us versus them, where us represents everyday citizens who feel overlooked, and them includes an establishment perceived as corrupt, distant, and out of touch with the public's real needs. Right-wing populism adds a layer of conservative ideology to this populist foundation, often emphasizing nationalism, strict immigration controls, skepticism of globalism, and a return to traditional values. Right-wing populists appeal to those who feel left behind in a rapidly changing world, offering them a sense of protection and belonging. They champion national sovereignty over international cooperation, advocating policies that keep jobs, laws, and culture within a nation's borders. At the same time, they criticize global entities like the European Union, NATO, and the United Nations, painting them as threats to national identity and autonomy. Historically, Europe has seen waves of nationalism and populism, but the current right-wing populist surge is notable for its scale and intensity. This movement has captured the political imagination in Hungary, Poland, France, Italy, and beyond, gaining momentum amid economic uncertainty, social change, and a perceived erosion of cultural identity. Understanding right-wing populism's appeal means understanding these fears and frustrations. Across Europe, right-wing populist parties and their leaders are reshaping the political landscape with messages of nationalism, anti-immigration policies, and fierce opposition to the European Union. Each country offers a unique case, but these leaders share similar goals: protecting national sovereignty, addressing economic concerns, and challenging traditional elites. In Hungary, Viktor Orbán and his party, Fidesz, have championed an illiberal democracy, where Orbán has centralized power, controlled the media, and pushed strong anti-immigration policies. With a vision of Hungary first, Orbán has led one of the longest-running right-wing populist administrations in Europe, appealing to those disillusioned with liberal policies and globalist influence. France has seen its own wave of populism through Marine Le Pen and her party, the National Rally. Le Pen has softened the image of her party over the years, positioning herself as a voice for the French working class, fighting to reclaim France from what she describes as threats posed by immigration and the EU. Her appeals to French national pride and cultural identity have struck a chord with many disillusioned voters. In Italy, Giorgia Meloni and the Brothers of Italy party rose from a minor party to a central player in Italian politics. Meloni's brand of populism combines patriotism with social conservatism, focusing on God, family, and country. Her party advocates against immigration and for a return to traditional Italian values, resonating with those who feel alienated by the progressive agendas of mainstream politics. Poland's Law and Justice Party, PiS, also exemplifies right-wing populism. Emphasizing Catholic values, national pride, and skepticism toward the EU, PiS leaders argue that Poland must protect its sovereignty against external pressures. Together, these leaders represent a wave of populism that defies European norms, challenging the very structures of the EU while promising to protect their nations from external influence and social change. The rise of right-wing populism in Europe is not happening in a vacuum. It's fueled by deep-seated economic and social concerns that have unsettled millions. At the heart of these concerns lies a growing frustration with economic stagnation. For over a decade, Europe has faced slow recovery from the 2008 financial crisis, prolonged by austerity measures that have cut public spending, wages, and welfare programs. For many working-class Europeans, this has meant diminished job security and a sharp rise in inequality. Right-wing populist parties have capitalized on this, promising to reverse the tide of economic hardship by prioritizing local industries and jobs. Another key factor is the impact of globalization. While open markets have brought prosperity to some, they've also resulted in the outsourcing of jobs, particularly in manufacturing, leaving blue-collar workers struggling. Many see globalization as an elite-driven force that benefits urban centers but leaves rural areas behind, widening the rural-urban divide. Right-wing populists often use this divide to their advantage, pledging to protect rural, traditional communities against the perceived threats of global trade and urban elitism. Social issues, particularly immigration, have added fuel to the populist fire. The refugee crisis of 2015 brought millions of immigrants to Europe, sparking widespread concerns over national identity, cultural cohesion, and security. For some, this influx represented not just a humanitarian issue but a threat to jobs, resources, and social values. Right-wing populists emphasize strict immigration policies, often appealing to those who fear cultural erosion or competition for resources. Cultural backlash against liberal values also plays a significant role. Right-wing populists position themselves as defenders of traditional European values, rallying against progressive stances on multiculturalism, LGBTQ+ rights, and feminism. By casting these values as foreign to Europe's identity, populists appeal to those who feel their way of life is under siege. This combination of economic hardship, globalization, immigration concerns, and cultural polarization has created a perfect storm for right-wing populists. They offer straightforward, nationalist answers to complex issues, making them a compelling alternative for those who feel unheard and sidelined by mainstream parties. The European Union (EU) was created with a vision of a united Europe, where countries would share economic growth, security, and cultural exchange. However, for many right-wing populist movements, the EU has become a symbol of overreach and a loss of national sovereignty. Right-wing populists argue that the EU imposes rules that infringe on national identity, control, and local economies. To them, the EU represents a distant elite that dictates policies without respecting individual countries' unique cultures and traditions. One of the primary criticisms these populists voice is Euroscepticism, a deep mistrust of the EU's power over national policies. Leaders like Viktor Orbán in Hungary and Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party argue that the EU pressures countries to accept liberal values, open immigration policies, and social reforms that don't align with their conservative values. They frame the EU as a threat to traditional ways of life, promising to reclaim their country's autonomy. For instance, Hungary and Poland have clashed with the EU over judicial independence and media freedom, arguing that EU mandates infringe on their right to self-governance. In response, the EU has threatened sanctions and funding cuts to member states that don't uphold its democratic standards, a move that populist leaders frame as an attack on national sovereignty. The Brexit vote in 2016 gave many right-wing populists hope, showing that it was possible to leave the EU entirely. Although Brexit presented numerous economic challenges, populist leaders across Europe point to it as proof that the EU isn't indispensable. The rise of right-wing populism in Europe is deeply intertwined with the digital age, where media, social networks, and misinformation play central roles in shaping public opinion. As traditional news outlets increasingly struggle to reach diverse audiences, social media platforms have become a powerful tool for populist leaders to bypass mainstream narratives and speak directly to the public. Leaders like Marine Le Pen, Viktor Orbán, and Giorgia Meloni have mastered these platforms, using them to amplify messages, rally supporters, and fuel distrust in the establishment. Social media allows populists to create echo chambers, where like-minded individuals reinforce each other's beliefs and filter out opposing viewpoints. Algorithms often prioritize sensationalist content, which makes populist messages more visible and widely shared. Posts that provoke strong emotional reactions, whether related to immigration, nationalism, or criticism of the European Union, are particularly effective. By curating content that resonates with viewers' fears and frustrations, social media helps foster a sense of community among supporters who might feel alienated or unheard by mainstream media. Misinformation and conspiracy theories thrive in these environments. From anti-globalist conspiracies to unfounded claims about immigration, these narratives can spread rapidly, shaping public opinion before they are fact-checked. Right-wing populists often capitalize on these beliefs, linking complex issues to simple, sensational explanations. This phenomenon has contributed to a widespread distrust in journalism and official sources, further reinforcing populist rhetoric that frames the establishment as corrupt or intentionally misleading. Alternative news sources also play a role in supporting right-wing populism, as populist leaders encourage followers to turn away from traditional media in favor of outlets that align with their views. These alternative platforms often present populist ideas as truth against the supposed fake news of the mainstream. As right-wing populism surges across Europe, a strong backlash has emerged, igniting a renewed fight to protect liberal democracy. Citizens, institutions, and opposition parties across the continent are rallying against what they see as an erosion of democratic values. This resistance, fueled by concerns over authoritarian tendencies, media restrictions, and attacks on judicial independence, is growing into a continent-wide movement in defense of democratic principles. One of the most visible responses to right-wing populism has been the rise of grassroots movements. Across Hungary, Poland, and France, people are mobilizing to protest policies that challenge freedom of speech, undermine judicial independence, or impose restrictions on the press. In Poland, large-scale protests known as Black protests initially rallied against restrictive abortion laws but have since evolved to address broader democratic concerns, signaling a strong civic commitment to liberal values. Mainstream political parties are also adapting, shifting their strategies to counter the populist wave. In many cases, centrist and left-wing parties are embracing elements of populist rhetoric to reconnect with citizens who feel alienated by the political elite. Leaders like Emmanuel Macron in France have adjusted their platforms to address national concerns about immigration and security, aiming to draw populist supporters back to more moderate positions. These shifts illustrate how populist pressures are reshaping Europe's traditional political landscape, forcing parties to tackle issues like economic inequality, cultural identity, and regional disparities more directly. Institutionally, the European Union has taken concrete steps to curb the anti-democratic actions of populist governments. The EU has proposed measures to withhold funding from member states that don't uphold democratic standards, a strategy aimed primarily at countries like Hungary and Poland, where right-wing populist leaders have sought to consolidate power. These financial sanctions are controversial, but they underscore the EU's commitment to safeguarding democracy within its borders, despite fierce pushback from populist leaders who accuse Brussels of interference. Thank you for watching until the end. If you found this documentary insightful, please give us a thumbs up and share it with others who might be interested. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.